couple loose ends I want to clear up real quick, actually. So I was talking about Chief Pluggy, and still in tune with the Chief Pluggy thing, but also the origins of Kentucky, where the name Kentucky comes from. So Chief Pluggy, last things I want to talk about, the Mohawk Chief Pluggy and his successful campaign into Georgetown, Kentucky. It was successful. He dies, okay? He dies in the New Year's raid. But the Christmas raid, there was 2 people killed, and then there's 3 people killed in the New Year's raid. So 5 people was killed, and Pluggy was killed, and McClellan. So both leaders of the 2 warring factions were killed. So they're both lost, right? Everybody loses in war. But it was a victory because McClellan Station, while they stayed there for another week in order to fight any future invasions, they left McClellan Station. They abandoned it. They took off after they shot Pluggy, and after they saw the other Shawnee or the other Mingo warriors run over the Ohio after Simon Kenton followed them. Another thing too, I mentioned Simon Kenton. There's a story. It is about Simon Kenton and Daniel Boone in Kentucky. How they're both just loners out there in Kentucky, and they're shooting or doing whatever it is that they do by themselves for hours at a time in the wilderness. And they come across one another, but they think that they're the Indians. They think that they're the Shawnee, or there's somebody, they don't know who the other person is. So they're sitting there exchanging shots from behind the trees, and they're shooting at each other all day, and they can't actually get a good eye on who the other person is. So they're just kind of volleying shots for an entire day long, and then eventually they found out who each other was, and they were, like best friends. So that's kind of an interesting story. And then also after Mohawk, the Mohawk Chief Pluggy was killed, you have Blackfish's Revenge. He came back on the 18th and the 28th, I think in 1777 in January. So it wasn't over. This was part of a campaign, a longer campaign. But 76, December 25th, 1776, the same time, George Washington crosses the Potomac River, which is on a New Jersey quarter. That picture, which has American flag on it, because George Washington is looking all heroic while he's crossing the Delaware, but he's got American flag that's got the stripes and stars that there would be no stripes and stars for in 1776 at the time. So there's a lot of inconsistencies actually with that picture, because that's not a portrait. It wasn't like someone snapped that picture, someone drew that. So that came out of someone's imagination. So that was December 25th. That's when the Christmas raid into Georgetown and McClellan Station happened. Everybody at McClellan Station leaves. So that went from 4 settlements in Kentucky that were successful to 3. So Harrisburg, Boonesboro, and Logan Station were still up, but there was no McClellan Station anymore. McClellan was dead. So that was a successful raid. Chief Pluggy died in the New Year's raid later on, but there was political effects after the fact. So that's Chief Pluggy. Now, Kentucky. Where did Kentucky get its name from? Kentucky. I once heard that it was an Iroquoian word for meadowlands. That seems to be the popular myth all over the internet. It's an Iroquoian word for meadowlands. But I also came across another thing that said it's an Iroquoian word for meadowlands because of what the Iroquois called the town of Skippakittiki. I read this one book that said the Shawnee town of Skippakittiki, which is in Clark County, northern Kentucky. So, Indians are all over Kentucky. So in Clark County, Kentucky, you had a Skippakittiki. And one author suggested that perhaps they mispronounced it, a Skippakittiki, to be Kentucky. The Skippakittiki is too long, so they say Kentucky. The same thing that they do with Chief Pluggy. Chief Pluggy, actually, his name was Pluckiminoti. So instead of calling him Pluckiminoti, they call him Pluggy. Hey Pluggy, Pluckiminoti, Skippakittiki, Pluggy, Kentucky. So that's just what I heard, but there's it might be just actually obfuscated in history. Nobody may never find out. Just might be in the toilet bowl of history. You never know where it came from. It's just what everybody calls it now, and so everybody went along with it. But there's several words that have been, several ideas and suggestions that have been brought up. It's definitely Native American origin, but it's been attributed to several languages and several possible meanings. Some of the meanings are meadowlands, some of it's cane and turkey lands, some of it's land of tomorrow. The name Kentucky referred originally to the Kentucky River. and so it came from the name of the region. Land of Tomorrow, Canaan, Turkey Lands, Meadowlands, the mouth of a river, a deep, channeled and clifty river, dark and bloody ground. So, just a bunch of different places. I'm just going to kind of go through the random stuff that I found on the internet about where Kentucky came from. It says that it's derived from an Iroquois name for an area south of the Ohio. So anything south of the Ohio was just, called, the Iroquois word. There's Kintotton. Kintotton is the land of tomorrow, so they think that maybe Kintotton might be Kentucky. Kentucky means meadow or prairie. There's an Iroquois word, K-E-H-T-A-K-E-H, K-Take, Kentucky, Kateke. That's pretty close, which means meadow or prairie. Also, River of Blood. I've heard that, River of Blood. Dark and bloody ground, dark and bloody hunting grounds. So, no matter what you want to call it, still a great, fun place to raise a family. Ignore dark and bloody ground and the River of Blood and, dark and bloody hunting grounds. So, I don't know. I think we could actually kind of make it up. There's a Mohawk word that's Kinhataki, which is the Iroquois word. Mohawk is the Iroquois. And they also, there's a Seneca word that's Kintake. So there's two words, both Mohawk and Seneca. Both Mohawks and the Seneca both have words for words that sound very close to Kentucky. And Seneca, I think Shawnee, Mohawks, Iroquois, I don't know. They're all actually, the confederations and the different tribes are kind of confusing. There's so many of them, and they were nomadic and small bands. They were tribal. They were family oriented. Dragon Canoe. Dragon Canoe is the one that said that there's dark clouds over the Pennyroyal, dark and bloody. So he was a Shawnee chief. And if Dragon Canoe was sitting there saying that I think he was Shawnee, he might have been Cherokee. But Dragon Canoe said that there was dark and bloody ground, that nobody has ever been able to conquer Kentucky. In fact, some of the literature I read said that the Indians believed that there was white people before Daniel Boone who came there and wiped everybody out, and then they all died. Some other names that Kentucky's also been called: the Hemp State, the Tobacco State, the Corn Cracker State, the Dark and Bloody Ground State. Hemp State, since it was one of the main crops, one of the penchant crops, one of their main staple crops here in Kentucky. And I didn't see what time this actually begins, so I'll just go until I feel like it's enough. Corn Cracker, this name originated as a reference to poor people living in the mountains. Corn Cracker. Another theory is derived from a crane that was common in Kentucky. The crane was said to make a cracking sound, was called a corn crake. So corn crackers for corruption of corn crake. Dark and Bloody Ground State. Its nickname refers to the Indian battles between the Creek, Shawnee, Chickasaw, Cherokee, other tribes that took place along the Cumberland River in Kentucky and Tennessee. Some have said the land was described in this way to Daniel Boone by an Indian chief, according to the Kentucky Blue Book. Dragon Canoe, a young Cherokee chief. So Dragon Canoe was a Cherokee chief. And during, I guess, the Treaty of Sycamore Shoals with Richard Henderson and the Transylvania Company, Dragon Canoe warned Daniel Boone that the ground that the whites were purchasing was a dark and bloody ground. There's also this passage in Kentucky and the Nation's History, which is this book right here. So Kentucky and the Nation's History by Mick Elroy, page 9 to 10. There's some footnotes. This was published in 1909, New York, by the Moffat, M-O-F-F-A-T, Yard and Company. But yeah, I wrote it actually all down here, so I'm just going to read off the laptop. But it says, the Discovery Settlement in present state of Kentucky by John Filson, page 7. The Delawares and the Shawnee called the vast, undefined tract of land south of the Ohio by the name Katawa, meaning the Great Wilderness. This name is long used interchangeably with the Iroquois word Kentucky, meaning the place of meadows or hunting grounds. Another origin of the name is given by John Johnson, who for years resided among the Shawnees. He declared that Kentucky is a Shawnee word. This is John Johnson. He says the Shawnee word meaning at the head of a river. It's from Archaeological Americana. Marshall, however, declares that the name was derived from that of a deeply channeled and cliffy river called by Indians Kentucky, which they pronounce with a strong emphasis. Kentucky. So they said Marshall is not saying that it's Shawnee or not a Shawnee, but he was saying that that's just what they called it. And they were pronouncing it with a strong emphasis, so they meant Kentucky, Kentucky. Pages 8 and 9 of the same volume of Marshall's History of Kentucky. Marshall adds that in consequence of frequent combats between the savages upon Kentucky soil, the country being thickly wooded and deeply shaded was called, in their expressive language, the dark and bloody ground. So that doesn't really designate who's saying this. John Johnson says that's a Shawnee word, at the head of a river, which makes sense. Kentucky River is where Kentucky came from. So this is due to the fact that Kentucky, the dark and bloody ground state, or the middle ground, as John Filson, following the practice of the Indians themselves, names it, lay just between the territory north of the Ohio, accompanied by the Iroquois, and the home of the less powerful Cherokees on the bottom, which is the generic story. You got Iroquois in Ohio, and you got the Cherokees in the Tennessee, and then it's just a hunting ground in the middle. So Iroquois, Cherokee, and nobody, right? Which is horseshit. There's Indians all over the place in Kentucky. Indians had permanent settlements in Kentucky. They had permanent settlements here, and they were genocide. They were wiped out. The Serpent Mound and all the mound builders, that was the Shawnee people. That was the Shawnee people that did that. Skippakithiki was wiped out by white people. Skippakithiki. There's like 300 men who were there in a census. So there were families there, and they're no longer there. 1754, and then Daniel Boone gets in there in the 60s or 70s, 1770s. So, Iroquois, Cherokee, each of the savage nations laid claim to Kentucky. Each used every art known to savage warfare to make good his claim. The war parties often met with the disputed territory, so constant was a conflict. No permanent villages could be established. This happened at Gist and Walker, found it a solitary wilderness containing few signs of even former habitations, with the exception of very ancient mounds and fortifications thickly scattered along the eastern borders and becoming less frequent as they approached the west. So, there's nothing going on in Kentucky except for these big-ass ancient mounds and all these fortifications and, this town, the Skippakithiki, and all these arrowheads and artifacts. And, there's a shitload of people, too. There's a bunch of people, a bunch of Shawnee people running around all over the place. It's not just a hunting grounds. The Shawnee people ain't going to come from Ohio just to kill a deer and then go back up there. They're going to hang out for a while. And just like the Shawnee book says, the Shawnee book was one of the best books I've ever read by Jerry E. Clark. He says that the Shawnee people didn't have permanent settlements ever. They had permanent settlements in the summer so they could raise crops, but during the winter they would follow the deer and bison around. So that's why it looked like there was no permanent settlements in Kentucky, but that's just how the Shawnee people lived. All of America, all this land, all of the world is ours. So, Tecumseh was right, and so is Dragon Canoe, and so is every Indian that's perished in Kentucky. They were right.